Come on in, everybody. We're official. We're officially live. It's Sunday Funnies. We're glad that you're here. We're going to be talking a lot of comics. We have a special guest in mind, and we have an opening to run. So let's run that opening, and then we'll be back with introductions, and we'll add our guest. We'll go from there. Hang on, everybody. Here we are. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I am your host for this program. I'm Randy Zimmerman. I'm a longtime alternative and independent comics producer, creator, editor, everything that you can imagine in this business I have done for quite a few years. Not as many as our guests, though. Really happy that you're here.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Daphne Lage, and I am a cartoonist, illustrator, and comic book artist from New York. I have been self-publishing comics since 1992, and you couldn't drag me out of this industry kicking and screaming. And I'm known for the funny animal fantasy Tall Tales and my medieval soap opera drama Eagle Raven, Heir of the First Unicorn, which just completed a very successful Kickstarter. Thank you, everybody. And you can read both my comics at Tall Tales, TAILS online.com, and egoworks.com, EGOWORKS.com. And you can also watch my videos on how I make these comics on YouTube at Daphne Lage, LAGE Art.
Fantastic. And of course, we have a special guest today that we're really happy to have on board, Mr. Dan Fogel. Dan, how are you?
Hey, doing fine. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you guys.
Thanks so much for coming on. Introduce yourself to our radio audience.
All righty. Well, I'm Dan Fogel. I've been selling comic books as a dealer for 40 years. Started creating, writing, and editing, and then publishing underground comics in the 90s. I worked on Cherry Comics, aka Cherry Pop Tart, with creator Larry Wells for years, helped that expand. And then towards a few years later in the decade, we started self-publishing Cherry, and then I branched out and started publishing new and old stuff, underground-wise, with new and old underground artists. So most of us are middle-aged now. I don't think I've published anyone currently who's like, under 40, but, hoping to fix that. I've been doing Fogel's Underground Price and Grading Guide in various iterations for 15 years. That's the one.
Got a copy of it right there.
And basically, it's one of two surviving print price guides at the moment. The other one's Overstreet's Guide, which, of course, is all the mainstream stuff. And I've been an advisor for that since 1987. So I help contribute to that. I love mainstream comics as well as undergrounds. And then the late, great Jay Kennedy in 1982 did the first underground comics price guide, which he called the official underground and new wave price guide.
Yeah.
And he wasn't able to, this is awesome, help connect stuff, pre-computer age. Early 90s, when I was being published by Dennis Kitchen's Kitchen Sink, I said, hey, if he's not going to be able to get a new one together, then people are telling me it's time for a new underground price guide.
Yeah.
And I was kind of plugged in both as a creator, but also as a dealer, as, retailer, whatever you want to call us. Although selling underground comics is more like a dealer than anything else. And he said, no, Jay's got it going on. He's laying in the research, give him a few years. And then by the end of the decade, when I was, started my publishing company, Fogel Comics, which was several years before I incorporated as Hippie Comics, Inc. I reached out to Jay and said, hey, let me help you. I can publish it, whatever. He said, no, I've got it going on. I've got, research assistants, college interns with 3x5 cards. So I said, well, I'll give you a few years and I got to get going on it because people need it. I need to know how to price stuff since 82. And so basically, I guess this is the origin of Fogel's Guide. I'll try and keep it short.
All right.
We got an hour.
Yeah, well, what the hell,
we got a couple hours. People are here to learn.
All right, let me circle back to all the other stuff I've been publishing, like Robert Crumb and some of the hipper cutting edge guys like Kieran Dwyer. All right, so basically, computers. I got my first Mac in 1990. I had played around and took one class on the Apple II in 1983. College roommate had one. The first paper I typed on it, I tripped over the cord, pulled it out, lost the whole paper. Wasn't as good when I had to rewrite it. It was something about Hercules. I don't know.
Mhm.
I was probably tying the comics into the myth. And so I became good friends with Don Donahue, the original publisher of Zap Comics, Apex Novelties. He lived near me in Berkeley. And since I had hooked up with Larry Wells at the famous underground comics parties they had every night of the con, and sometimes during the day at San Diego back in the day, hooked up with Larry. And then I was still selling comics, but artistically, I was producing and directing theater in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Cool.
One of the things I had adapted was the underground / indie open season, which if I could have kept, we were turning people away towards the end. If I was able to extend the run for a while, that would have been cool. We later did a staged reading at WonderCon a couple years after that. But so anyone I didn't know already, started plugging into me from the comics world, although it was pretty much the circle of the conventions. And then Larry said, "Hey, I dig what you're doing." He knew I had some literary skills, so I started editing and writing, helping him out with Cherry Comics, starting with number 10, which you held up on your December 6th show, I believe. The cover of the Randy.
Was that the one that slid by in our opening?
No, it's the one you held it up. It's the one with her winning the beauty pageant, and then you flipped over the cover and had the Viking painting that Daphne laughed at. Yeah. That's my first issue.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then so we were editing, and I, helped him coordinate writing scripts.
Mhm.
And then we were at Last Gasp, and we wanted to expand to an anthology title, and eventually became named Cherry's Jubilee by one of the workers at the Capital City local distribution warehouse in the Bay Area in Hayward. It was kind of like a contest. We put it out there. He came up with, "Hey, it's Cherry's Jubilee." So it was going to go with Last Gasp. That fell apart. We ended up going with Tundra, which was Kevin Eastman, who I had known for years.
Yeah.
I met him right after the cartoon started, when the only merch was the RPG little lead figures.
Mhm.
And so he was doing Tundra. So we took that, did two very well selling. I know he turned a profit. We had multiple printings on those, and then merged with Kitchen Sink, where we had already moved the main Cherry title over.
Mhm.
So we got a bunch of mainstream working on it too. So basically, I had decades worth of networking and being behind a table and selling thousands of books, and being in the Bay Area, which is what became the main part of the underground world.
Yeah.
I was certainly plugged in. I started meeting cartoonists, when I was 10, going to Baycon, starting with Trina and Lee Mars. So we can talk more Trina later, Daphne. I can fill you in on stuff. And so I met, so at these parties where it was a nexus and everything, that's how I met Don. So basically, he was still doing a retail catalog, one of the few left. He had stopped publishing and He had stopped publishing, but he still had distribution quantities, and he was using an old Mac and was using FileMaker. Okay, this is getting too boring. Anyway, I updated his data, the spreadsheet for his catalog became one of the main spines of my price guide.
Okay.
And then with some friends helping me do programming and switch from FileMaker, now everything's in Excel. And then publishers gave me their info in Excel or Word, and then I just started filling it in. I had been clipping, other than firsthand knowledge, I had been clipping ads for years from Comics Buyer's Guide, and paying attention to other sources. So I was able to kind of interpolate it and got it going. I did a supplement several years later. We can go back when we do covers later. I'll show you covers and stuff when we're showing off. And then basically,
how long did it take you to get the initial guide together? Would you say?
About from when we announced it, about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
But it was really only 11 months of hardcore work when I finally had the crew, and my buddies Neil Strudwick and Jim O'Connor helped me put it together.
Cool.
And then 4 years later, I did a supplement magazine, which updated some prices, corrected the many typos I wasn't able to catch.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole story there.
Oh, yeah.
We were late. Diamond, I just gave up after a certain point, proofing it because it had been fine before. But when we had to alter the publishing file back then in Quark, I'm so glad I use InDesign now. Quark. It crashed my old computer.
Yeah.
I did my first anthology of Undergrounds in 99, UG 3K. It would commonly crash it.
All of Daphne's experiences with Quark just came rushing back.
No, for real. I'm still updating files, to this day, transferring everything to InDesign. No, the thing is, it's like, it's always, I always find it trippy to finally like put a face to, to certain project, because it's like, for me, it was like, even though I never read a copy of Cherry, it's like Cherry is one of those icons that stand out in my head, along with Omaha the Cat Dancer, as to like putting me in a certain time period. Mm-hmm. So it's so it's just a gas really right now.
We appreciate everybody being here. Marvi from Portugal says, "My kind of dealer."
Yep.
Because you're the guy to ask this. What exactly is the definition of an underground comic?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I need to say that. My short answer now, the funny answer is whatever I fucking well say it is. And I cram it into the Excel and it spits out into InDesign. But really, it boils it down. I'm sure I've got pithy quotes here and there, but basically what you guys were talking about, it's the personal expression, uncensored, beyond what the artist wants to say. Yeah, you got the adult stuff, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Mm-hmm. But the more mature themes earlier than it was able to be done in the mainstream comic market. Now, if we want to, the classifications, the hardcore people say only up till 1973, when the distribution system collapsed due to a combination of lawsuits and local porn standards, obscenity standards were ruled by the Supreme Court. And then the decline of head shops until the beginning of the Reagan era, when most of the head shops dried up. So they just say, okay, the books that were there at that point, which coincides with the birth of the modern direct market, which had been an outgrowth and modeled from the underground comics distribution market, the hippie comics head shop print mint distribution market. So the books that survived and the artists that survived and kept creating, they just moved into comic stores, conventions, mail order from Last Gasp, from Ripoff, from Kitchen Sink, from Apex Novelties, Bud Plant, major, right? In the public, the print runs were in the tens of thousands back in the day. And when things were selling well, there was a lot of stuff that got printed that wasn't going to sell through or sell well ultimately. Just like, any kind of art form or any version of comics, you have too much of a glut and there's not enough. Mm-hmm. Not enough distribution, not enough buyers, not enough interest, or it's just too much product. But so pretty much all the main publishers survived in one way or form up till the present, with the exception of Print Mint, which basically went out of business publishing. I think by 81, but really by 78 when they started publishing Zap. But there are plenty of warehouse copies of stuff that made its way out into the world from there over the years. But pretty much, Ripoff is just doing mail order. They haven't published for years. Gilbert Shelton, creator of early self-publisher, Freak Brothers, Wonder Warthog, who had been in mainstream magazines like you guys mentioned, Help, etc.
Yeah.
Before then, he was one of the founders of Ripoff. Even earlier than that, he was actually the first publisher of what some consider the first underground comic by Frank Stack, The Adventures of Jesus by Fulbert Sturgeon. My cover artist and good friend. Gilbert had run a bunch of photocopies. I don't know if it was officially a Xerox. He ran off a few dozen photocopies, University of Texas.
Mimeographs.
He had a friend do it, and there was one circulating. And some of those strips, they had a newsletter, like starting in '64. That's in my guide. I've got one floating around in some box somewhere. And it was, and Frank was using a pseudonym, Fulbert Sturgeon, like Gilbert Shelton, but with his initials, because he was, up until recently, in academia. And it was, whimsically blasphemous to some people. Hold on, I had to click away a weird notice about JavaScript popping up on my browser there. It was distracting. You guys didn't see it, but it was distracting me.
Yeah.
So Gilbert had run off some of those around the same time. Jack Jackson self-published God Knows with about 1,000 copies in 1964. And then Printment, which we had mentioned before, posters, hippie stuff. They started, distributing and printing distributing rock posters around 65 when those started in San Francisco. And Joel Beck, who was a Bay Area guy, who'd been working in the California Pelican, along with John Thompson and some other people, which was the UC Berkeley, college magazine. So college magazines were one of the main birthplaces of the talent that, like Gilbert Shelton and Frank, that would be doing undergrounds. So Joel Beck was the San Francisco version of that. And then they did The Prophet and Lenny of Laredo, and we're distributing that to the early head shops around the country. And basically, I can go more in depth on the history of undergrounds in detail, but and then Kitchen, all right, so San Francisco. So basically, Printment, yeah, that was San Francisco for sure. You got your Joel Beck, and then the people from all the other regions started coming. You had Gilbert Shelton and the other guys from Rip Off, Jack Jackson, Fred Todd. They started self-publishing, and then they moved out, with stuff in their trunk to San Francisco, and then in the Milwaukee and Midwest area, you had Dennis Kitchen and the Bijou Comics guys in Chicago, Skip Williamson, Jay Lynch, and New York. Around the same time that Printment was doing that stuff with Joel Beck, they were doing the East Village Other, and so you had the New York people, of which Katrina Robbins was one.
I was about to ask you about New York. Yeah.
Yeah, you got these foci here, and then see people moved. It started the real wave when people started moving. Crumb and other people, Shelton from the Midwest, from Nebraska, Charles Plymell, a beatnik, poet and publisher, had started publishing S. Clay Wilson, and then Plymell moved to San Francisco. Then Wilson moved to San Francisco, also with a trunk full of his portfolios. Then Crumb moved to San Francisco from Cleveland, where I am now. Made the pilgrimage a few years ago. And so when, I guess it was at a party when Crumb met Donahue, and Crumb had been doing some tabloid stuff, starting with the East Village Other and other tabloids in newspaper. Mm-hmm. I've got a few in the other room I can show you, but basically his first strips getting national attention. He wasn't paid for the reprints around the country, but he was paid by Brian Zahn and Eurostocks, who said, hey, do a comic, I'll publish it. And then Zahn vamoosed to India or wherever with the original art to zero, or buried to zero. Zap Zero was supposed to be Zap One, and it was all Crumb.
Yeah.
So then Crumb did Zap One, and he was doing these October, November '67.
Did that artwork ever resurface?
Yeah, it would. Actually, what happened was Crumb had sent a photocopy to William Lyons, or one of those dudes in New York, the literary dudes, to help get the crossover with publishing there. And of course, Harvey Kurtzman and Help magazine, which had published Crumb and Shelton, was based in New York. And Crumb and Dana, his first wife, whom I was close to, and him, her agent, and blah, blah, blah. So that's all another story there. So they
well, no. Like I was asking if they found the artwork that he bonded with India.
Yeah, I believe it did turn up like in the late 70s.
All right. Okay, so there's a happy ending.
Yeah, after Crumb had gotten the word out here and there. And to the best of my knowledge, and I'd have to do some forensic search. Yeah, I seem to recall the original art itself did eventually resurface, but not until like the late 70s or 80s.
Oh, okay.
So all right. So basically, Donahue. All right. So Plymell had a multi-lift. I've got video footage of it online. We helped rebuild that original printer, 1350. So he said, "Hey, met Crumb at a party. Hey, let's do like an piece of art, like a comic book, but it's like a modern, psychedelic type comic book in the form." And Crumb wanted, or it was Crumb's idea, but one of them said they wanted to have an actual comic book like they grew up loving and reading in their youth.
Yeah.
The Karl Barks, the EC, like you talked about. So basically, Donahue was the publisher, and he traded like a $350 reel-to-reel portable cassette recorder and player to Plymell. And then so Plymell with his press and Don, teaching Don how to use it, did like the first, and they argue about how many are there, but there's, if you split the difference and say 3,500 were printed, 500 were burned up in the Maori Opera fire, blah, blah, blah. But people have misremembered it.
Yeah.
But I pretty much forensically get in here for knowing Donahue and working with him up until his death. If we say 3,500, not too many people can argue,
Yeah.
And, the official story is Crumb and pregnant Dana with their first son, Jesse, on the street corner in Haight-Ashbury. Crumb did a famous cartoon of that. It was really more, they lived near the Haight-Ashbury, walking distance.
Yeah.
Where they had moved out from Cleveland. Dana had followed him. But it was really more about Dana and Donahue walking into a head shop and then hook it up in, Moe's Books in Berkeley. And they sold out pretty quickly. They sold the run to this bookstore, this print mint distribution system. There's an article in here about it. Bob Bierbaum, my old mentor and boss, he talks about, and he'll tell you the name of the dude who drove the truck. Okay. Because they would trade in these hubs. They'd trade with, they get the last gasp and the ripoff in print mint books would be driven, and then they'd sell the weed paraphernalia, the pipes and stuff, and then they'd trade the comics with Kitchen Sink. And then they'd go to New York and they'd trade it. So things went pretty quickly. If you need a first valuable printing of the early undergrounds, you had to have been in either San Francisco or New York, ideally, for those first 2 years. And a lot of the collections I'd buy are from those eras.
Yeah.
And then Mo Moskowitz of Mo's Books, he put up the money for the second printing. And Don officially traded, was now the owner of the press. And so
now we're talking about Zap 1 or Zap 0?
Yeah, Zap number 1, which was supposed to be Zap 2.
Yeah.
And that's when they got the photocopy. That's why it was Zap 0 later on. But basically, the first printing, the Plymell printing, says printed in little red lettering on the back cover, printed by Charles Plymell. The Donahues, the second printings, said printed by Don Donahue. And they did another run of several thousand, and those sold out pretty immediately. And then basically, without going into too much, and Don did a few other books, and Victor Moscoso, the poster artist, fine artist, S. Clay Wilson, who had slunk out from Nebraska, the Checker Demon, and Rick Griffin, who was doing psychedelic posters, but had been part of the cartooning scene through surfing magazines and other things. They basically showed up at Dana and Robert's door and said, "Hey, it's Crumb in. We want to, So they expanded Zap into an anthology title. And then, that's a second or later printing. Actually, I've got a second printing I'm going to show you in a minute. So you start getting other artists in there. When Crumb's, the 0 was all Crumb, so that became 0, reserved the numbering. And then Print Mint just Donahue's little press couldn't handle it, the volume or the precision or more pages, frankly, anything more than 24 pages, including cover. So Print Mint used professional printers, expanded it. Mo invested again. So it was well funded. So that's why, and then, hundreds of thousands of copies of each issue over the years have been published, many continuously. And so basically that's what started the Renaissance.
About how many print runs do you think Zap One has gone through?
Like the SAT, I forget it after.
He's having to refer to the Bible, folks.
Yeah, and yeah. So one, to the best of my knowledge, there've been 10 printings through 2003.
Okay.
So how many books like survive? I mean, because what's funny is like, because I think of underground books, like, oh, these must be the rarest of the rares, and now you're telling me there's probably like 100,000 of these circulating.
Well, later printing, we're talking multiple printings. There's only one first printing of Cannery Row by John Steinbeck, but there's dozens of other printings. So that's the thing, it's a real book. It's literature. It's not periodical. So that's why continuously you got your Steinbecks, you got your Hemingway, everything kept in print, and that was the bookstore model they followed. So basically, 6 to 8 on, but there are many small printing things that are super rare that have been out there, and those are, but yeah, the underground, it was like the Tijuana Bibles under the counter, then the head shops, adults only, pretty much, and then the distribution system went into the direct comic book market, which was relatively underground, for years and years. Really, not until the death of Superman in '93 did most people even realize there were comic book stores. So those have been around since the late '60s. And some of the early underground publishers, San Francisco Comics and comic book company, Gary Arlington, another early publishing figure. So he was both every kind of comic book retailer, but also he was the headquarters. So people would meet and work, and it was all, every area. But yeah, most people started coming to California between 68 and 70 from around the country in San Francisco, and then that's where it became the nexus.
Right. I mean, did it start off in California, like that's just happened where everyone was, or was there something specific happening in California that attracted everybody there, or was it just more weather?
It was rock and roll. It was psychedelic rock. It was the San Francisco rock scene. That you can read up on that, Red Dog Saloon, Charlatans, but basically the Bill Graham, and then the Family Dog stuff started by late '65, and then a lot of these artists, Moscoso, Griffin, were comic book vans, and then they started doing, because print meant selling posters of all kinds and whatever, and being the distribution for roach clips and incense and Kama Sutra oil and underground comics, and that nationwide distribution they started, it was in San Francisco. But yeah, it was the hippy dippy Summer of Love got Crumb out there half a year before, seeing what was happening, and then Shelton and the other guys. It was because of the psychedelic scene, the Summer of Love, the hippie revolution. It built on the fact that the main distribution had started there because of print mint selling those rock posters. People would see these great posters for these concerts, and they'd say, I want to own one, and they'd be tearing them down from the telephone pole, so they started reprinting them. That's a whole nother long story. But yeah, pretty much. But Kitchen Sink, Kitchen stayed out in Milwaukee till he merged with Tundra and went to East Hampton, Mass in mid '90s. Rip Off had already started up in San Francisco, but they had moved out from Texas. And then the Bijou guys stayed pretty much in, either in the Chicago area for a while or then New York, but New York was one of the loci as well. Spain, Rodriguez got his start in the East Village Other. Trina's first husband, I believe, or second husband, whatever. Kim Deach, another wonderful artist who's still around and doing stuff.
Yes, he is.
He was part of that scene. And then there were people who've come and gone, Yasseri and other names, but pretty much East Village Other was a weekly, and the underground newspaper syndicate had started out around the country. Campus newspapers, anti-war newspapers, and that. So print was at its.
We refer to them as alternative papers nowadays.
Yeah, counterculture, alternative.
Yeah.
So people were seeing the comics in there and getting to know. And then Crumb had a mainstream book deal in '68 through his friend who I believe had the originals, the Xeroxes of Zap Zero, Head Comics, and that had multiple printings. So that got him nationwide attention. So in 68, Crumb really blew up really quickly in 68 because he got that nationwide attention.
Yeah.
Half a year later, he's got a book in the bookstores. Though they did censor out a couple of strips. Obviously.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah, because there's only so much. But
yeah,
obviously the later printings on were unexpurgated. So you see the dimensions in the early Zaps, Zap 0 and 1, the all Crumb ones, and you could tell they were originally supposed to be for newspaper dimensions, real tiny, shrunken down. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the Freak Brothers stuff. Those started out LA Free Press. So yeah, really hard to read the smaller the printings get of the early Freak Brothers before he was just doing it straight up for the comics. Mm-hmm. Or he'd do it more comic book formatted for magazines or other clients where it appeared. All right, I'm going to catch my breath for a second while you guys think of the next question. There's my lighter.
Well, I have, it's like, well, what I'm thinking, because it's like, my experience with comics obviously came a little bit later. And the thing is, though, there seems
Daphne, I think everybody's experiences in comics came in a little
later.
Later.
Although what's funny is that he's talking about like all of these head shops and all that, and I remember like me and my family would hang out in the Village a lot in the 70s, in the late 70s, and it sounds like it's still it was like still like that. Although the Village is not like that anymore. But
even Village Voice is gone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the funny thing is that like the last time we did this show, I guess it's like I was confusing a lot of, I guess, like independent comics with underground comics, and I'm kind of wondering like how much of an overlap is that, because I remember reading an article about Robert Crumb completely losing his mind about like Dave Sim and Wendy Peeney when they came out with, Cerebus and ElfQuest, say that they were ruining underground comics.
I've never read that.
Right.
He did some online, or he did some interviews online, like 15 years ago, and the people quote out, here's what he says on this person. Here's
right. Yeah.
I don't know what that is. I do know he's said shit and apologized for it later. Because he dissed Cherry in the Cherry movie, and I called him out on it, and he apologized on it.
So it's like, the fact that the idea of calling ElfQuest and Cerebus underground, I mean, it's like I said, like how much of an overlap is there between, like, when does underground transition into independent?
Basically, it's whatever you want to label it, underground, indie, alternative, but. In Kennedy's 82 guide, God rest his soul, he died in 07. He had a ground level area, what he called ground level. We put in ElfQuest, Cerebus, and Star Reach titles, among others, that were, underground. They were more adult, and they showed nipples, but they weren't as explicit. So Neil Adams and the other guys could draw nipples, Giordano, and had a good time doing it, because then a lot of people crossing over between the mainstream and underground. Right. So really, if what you want to call indie in the modern sense, that would have been by the early 80s when you had the mini comics revolution and the indie comics being huge, starting with ElfQuest, the self-publishers, Cerebus, which are also in Overstreet. Though I told Richard Peeney I'd finally add ElfQuest because I do it in more detail per issue. But I've got Cerebus in there because I go way back with Dave, and one book per line, and it's just just a matter of fine tuning stuff. It's not better than what Overstreet has in there. I can just have more details. So and then so basically, if you define it as a self-publisher or an independent publisher who doesn't own the rights, basically underground is creator owned. Bottom line, if it's creator owned and you can do what you want with your property, then it's underground. Initially up until, and then you got the underground guys, then you got the companies coming that specialize in doing indie alternative people. You got your Fantagraphics and Eclipse and Pacific.
Kitchen Sink evolved into that too.
Yeah. And so nothing was alternative until the late 70s, 80s. We got your punk music and so people didn't really. I don't recall everyone really hearing saying it until then, except it was alternative medicine or stuff in the past. So then you got your indies, alternatives, and then there's stuff if it's not only in head shops and it's in distribution, as broad distribution as anything that you can get, in terms of the comic book store market, or or mail order catalogs, or or going to conventions or whatever. And some people prefer one label over the other, but you can nail it down, I would say, by the early 80s. And I'm updating, in my supplement in 2010, I did a mini comics listing, and I did an underground UK listing, which will be expanded in my volume 2 we're working on now. I'll tell about later. And so then the 15 guide came a few years after that. So it's an infinite thing, especially with mini comics, with Xerox do it yourself. As printing got cheaper, a hippie could own a printing press, in the late 60s, or people would work at print shops and then do comic jobs on the side. Ripoff initially started doing basic print jobs as well, but it got untenable, because they just get so freaking high. They'd have trouble running, and then things.
Wow.
In the early years, they got their shit together.
You got to pick a hobby and stick with it.
Donahue and Ripoff, they shared the Maori Opera, where loft space on the same upper floor. And Don would stay up all night, playing with split font colors and drinking brandy and smoking pot, and it was art for these guys. So going back to definition, creator-owned art, of a type that everyone knows what it is. I know what porn is when I see it. I know what undergrounds are when they see it. But it's rooted in the hippie movement, basically. Hence my branding, Hippie Comics. Yeah, for my company, real simple. Yep, Yep, that came out of Ripoff Press. Great stuff. And the game got a good price. See, they were selling enough stuff by the early mid 70s. Like I said, any new underground, mid 10,000 initially. Even the smaller guys, regional, could do a few thousand, relatively inexpensive.
And you hear that indie comic publishers, 10,000.
Yeah, for real. Like I'm kind of having a hard time getting past that number.
Oh, my numbers are way shrunk since the 90s. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I was selling stuff that, anyway, we all know the story. I've got a few easy ones here.
I told him he could show us whatever you need.
Second printing Zap. This is the Donahue edition. First printing was more yellowish and had the 25-cent print. And then here on the back, printed by Don Donahue. It's kind of
right there along the bottom. Yeah. Yep.
Right there.
Now, which version, which printing of Zap had the sticker, the red little sticker over the price?
Okay, stickers. Well, whatever was priced less than the sticker on it. Basically, stickers. That's an issue. Basically, prices would go up. Underground 25 to 35, and then 50 cent became the standard for a few years, and then 60 cents, 75 cents, $1. Just like mainstream comics, the prices went up. So a sticker is okay. So you've got, a few years in there, you're still sitting on some 50-cent cover books, and now the cover price is 75 cents. Then the publishers themselves and the distributors themselves will put those stickers on them, or even the retailers will put the stickers. So you got your Freak Brothers, 4 with the 75-cent cover, but you still got some 60-cent, earlier issues, and but to buy a new one, it would have to be the 75-cent price. So that's when people put the stickers on. So pretty much whatever earlier printing is that someone slapped it on, and I basically deduct a grade worth of value to having a sticker, a dealer sticker. If someone put, a little Hello Kitty on it, that's a whole nother story. But basically, if it's an 8.0, a very fine, you got that sticker on it. Might be a VF otherwise, but it's a 7.0. Fight me. That's how I do the math.
I hear you. Cool.
Is there anything? I mean, is there anything comparable to underground right now, or is it kind of like, are underground comics kind of irrelevant this day and age?
Well, it's totally relevant in terms of the not just the freedom of the art form and the people who are still working, but we're still in the effects of the age of Aquarius to a certain point. A lot of people have aged out. The younger ones, the cool ones always discover underground. So you got an old hippie croaks, you got a new hippie, a cool younger person who maybe comes into comics from indie comics, or however he gets into comic books, or even from mainstream. But basically the topics are still the same: overpopulation, fighting fascism, women's rights, human rights. The adult topics are all the same: ecology. So those, unfortunately, those are, all those topics are still relevant. Now the comics themselves, there's so many more independent comics, and than there were before, and so many more varieties and ways for people to get them. Then the thing is, when people were being sued for obscenity all around the country for certain books, Snatch Comics, which I reprinted, in a nice little trade I'll show you later.
I got one of those.
People were stockpiling. There's warehouses and head shops full of books. Yeah. When you had these print runs of 10,000 at a pop, 5,000, whatever, there's lots of stockpiles there. So basically, the short answer is there's only a few thousand old school underground collectors now, but there's a crossover with the newer or the indie or the what I would consider underground in spirit, newer stuff. Well, not so new anymore, but the Love and Rockets boys, the Hernandez brothers, they're still producing stuff. And I could be tossing out all the Fantagraphics names: Peter Bagg, Dan Clowes, and the crossover with mainstream and movies and all that. So Fantagraphics, as a publisher, really was most responsible for putting that all out there and keeping it going and expanding the market. But
they've done a lot of really awesome Crumb collections as well.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. All props to those guys.
Yeah.
Gary Groth, late great Kim Thompson, who gave me some data, not in Excel, but in Word. So it was easy enough to cut and paste. Dennis Hitchens' Excel kind of peters out by the late 90s because he wasn't able to keep it up. Here's this issue came out in 1974. Here's who was in it. Ripoff had a pretty comprehensive Excel spreadsheet in the sales going back to the early 70s. Obviously, they entered the earlier data later, but they were an ongoing distributor and ongoing publisher on the strength of Freak Brothers. Yeah, and early to get computerized and be hip that way. So now, when we discover a new Canadian price on a Freak Brothers, I can look in the Excel and say, oh, it was there then. I had missed that before. This is the 21st printing, not the 20th. So it's an ongoing thing. Yeah. And there's stuff out there. Kennedy put stuff in there so people couldn't rip him off in his first guide. I can tell you now, and it took me a while to figure this out, decades. There, what he called the fourth printing of Zap Comics 1 with a 50-cent cover price doesn't exist. Never existed. Never a 50-cent cover. Went from 35 cent from second printing, through third, and then basically there were multiple printings. If they're identical, I just combine them now. Kennedy, if it went back to press, otherwise identical, it's the seventh. I combine them. If the state of the book is different, I call it a new printing now. It's a lot easier.
So he would have completists out there chasing ghosts.
Yeah, exactly. And it took me too long to figure it out. But, I just got some data on Strawberry Funnies in November from Victor Marcillo, the comics reverend, who's, loves this stuff all across the board, but he's my number one.
There's a title Varian won't be able to take now. There's already a comics reverend, V. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. So
I don't so much mind the
so the obscenity things, it was the Joe Blow story with incest in Zap Comics 4, but it was also Snatch Comics. And basically, after Zap, Crumb lost all the goodwill of most women by doing Snatch Comics. This is my reprint of the cover. This is the trade I did with fold-outs of all 3 issues. Yeah. Here is a...
I'm enlarging your screen again.
Print Snatch 2. And obviously he's parodying racism.
Hello, 69. Yeah.
And basically you can tell this is a first, not just from the cover price and the colors, but on the inside, a Rory Hayes thing, there's different colors
Uh-huh.
a woman's urine in one page, a full panel page.
So really, with that cover, it was only women that he pissed off.
Well, people, like I said, the cool jazz and hippie hipsters who smoked weed got it. Here's, first print number 3. And then other artists started getting in on it as well from the front. So basically, and I learned this all when reprinting the trade, which took me 10 years to get together. It's basically, 80% Crumb, 20% S. Clay Wilson, and then, a few other guys. If you page 8 pages of Rory Hayes, 8 pages of Robert Williams, and then all the way down to 1 page of Griffin in Spain.
Okay.
But then, 3 issues of that. There was Jizz Comics, later on FUDGE Comics, and that was in the style of the Tijuana Bibles, which I had.
I was going to say you might have to explain what a Tijuana Bible is to our audience, but be careful, please, when you show them.
Okay, well, I'm not going to open the cover.
Yeah, we may be
Appreciate that.
demonetized.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
Well, like I alluded to, presses need to be kept going to be profitable.
Yeah.
Whether you're doing a comic or a flyer or whatever. And the mob pretty much ran comics distribution in New York from the
Lovely.
beginning.
Yeah. Why does that not surprise me?
So they said these were made out of Tijuana, but they were being done, again, some of them by even regular comics artists. All right, let me just hope the first thing I grab is going to be it.
There's a lot of power in
Adding
dimes.
these to the price guide. The second volume I'm going to be talking about more.
Yeah,
Even though
we'll,
it's how
we'll
time
bring
is.
that
Hold
up.
on,
We'll bring that up before we're done.
I'm still relishing the idea of the mob getting involved in comics.
Yeah, so basically, these were literally
that's
underground, under the counter. And the rarest, most valuable ones are the ones with, recognizable characters.
Comics and distribution.
And these, like mini comics, these are infinite in the amount, but there's ways that I'm putting the data together. I always go to the top experts and bribe them somehow or beg them, so I get the data. Like I said, it's.
Wait, is the name of that issue Hot Panties? The one you just took from?
Maybe.
Probably.
Maybe.
Well, it's basically Boots. I think it's Boots and her buddies.
Okay.
So they parodied newspaper strips and other pop culture. Obviously Blondie.
From Blondie and Dagwood.
Yeah. I think I've seen variations of those in Spanish in my grandfather's collection.
Willie and Moon
ran in different ways up until the late 50s.
Yeah.
As you can tell, different versions by the quality
and then they were replaced by chick publications.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. For sure. But yeah, good analogy. So basically, all right, so this was a precursor, and this was an influence. And basically, I call this a DVD remastering because we digitized it all, had some color foldouts with the covers, but I have what I call DVD commentary, where we have articles about all the artists and about the publisher, but also about the whole scene and the birth of Tijuana Comics and how it led. The great leading historian Patrick Rosencrantz did a great, the persistence of perverse. He's got a great essay in here.
I don't know if I want to blow that up, Dan.
Believe me, we're not gonna do that. Basically, so that's again, so Snatch Comics was in the mode of these dirty little Tijuana Bibles.
And a lot of that material is really cutting edge.
It's foul and as far beyond as you can imagine, but they were parodying. It was satire. But
that's part of the fun of the underground stuff, is the artists were saying what they wanted to do, doing what they wanted to do, and a lot of times it was very counter to the rules and regulations that you'd get like off of the newsstand comics. Oh, we can't talk about this. Well, guess what? Here's this whole strip on it.
I mean, as far as you go, most pretty much
This might be me jumping a little ahead, but I'm figuring it's kind of related. It's like, did the Mike Diana situation kind of like affect I guess like the way you were seeing how these like how it might have affected like the undergrounds and what people were doing at the time? Because like I barely I remember the whole Mike Diana thing happening with Boiled Angel, but I don't know the detail of it, because every time I try to start watching the documentary, I just break out in hives and it just horrifies. It's like a horror movie for me. So I'm just wondering if that kind of like, if you saw like a ripple effect from that, or whether it was just something that everyone just let it pass and went on.
Basically, that's a very good question.
Oh, thank you.
And one of the last new books I published was by Mike Diana. I'm going to dig up and show you later. I got some other goodies. Here's the other half of I've got everything in my basement where I can smoke, where it's 0 wind chill factor outside and snowing. So that's why I'm so bundled up. And be thankful I'm not running a loud little heater. So basically, to sum up, Mike, he was the first cartoonist arrested for creating and selling to an adult comics. And it was he was basically a sting, in Florida. We can go on in obscenity laws and local stuff. So yeah, it did send a chill to a certain thing. The Great Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, co-founded by Dennis Kitchen, leapt to his defense. And there's an article on the Comic Book Legal Defense Club website, cbldf.org, which has, tells about the whole case and everything. But yeah, it did freak out some people. But really, if you lived in a hip locale, but he was doing the mini comics thing, and he was as extreme as it could get with the religious and sexual and scatological overtones. Ironically, he's like one of the sweetest guys I know.
Oh yeah. I could imagine.
But yeah, I mean, when I incorporated, I made sure, you worry about being sued, doing selling cherry, doing the X-rated thing. And basically, we were treated like pariahs by some parts of the comic book industry up until the turn of the century, when everything kind of merged, and the creators crossover people had aged, and, it had all kind of mellowed. And really, that's kind of what my focus was when we expanded Cherry into Jubilee and got mainstream creators doing stuff as well, was to make it part of the wider comic book market, which really the direct market helped do that, because you get, but if you live in a municipality, there are still some stores that don't sell adult comics because they made that choice. They might have made it 20, 30 years ago, but that's everyone's right to sell what they want to sell. Any kind of store, that's your whole thing. But it was kind of freaky. And yeah, you were reading the Comics Journal, the Journal of Note at the time. They did a lot of coverage, all the media, Comics Buyer's Guide. It was chilling to a certain extent, but it was an isolated event. There were other things, the earlier cases, the Friendly Franks, whatever. Basically, you get someone running for attorney general and they want to make their local district attorney, they want to make their bones, as fighting corruption, or alcohol or weed or porn or whatever. They were going after D&D as well, the fundamentalism, all that. So that was the whole local municipality thing that the Supreme Court in 1973 started, and then Reagan finished the Reagan era, killed off the head shops. But really, the books did continue and have always been in distribution continuously. And that's the multiple printings, the trade paperbacks. That's why I publish stuff in trade paperbacks for the modern market, for the comic book market and bookstore markets, with barcodes and nice paper and slick quality, is so that stuff is still in print. Whoever's publishing Hemingway now, they're not doing it on the cheap, All right, Mike Diana published all 3 of the most sued people in the world. Mike being the trifecta: Kieran Dwyer, Dan O'Neill of the Air Pirates, and I I'm been friends with them since I was a little kid, and doing business with them. I'm still Ted Richards' art agent. So basically, so Sugar Fang, up until I retired last year, I was helping run the Big Apple Comic-Con in New York City. Which basically, I'd have big setup in San Diego with all the artists, and blow through money and have fun, have them down there at the booth. Sometimes 11 artists crammed in 3 booths, along with a full complement of Golden and Silver Age and Green Lantern statues and whatever. It was pretty eclectic. So say, hey, what'll it take to get Wilson in Spain out to New York? Mike Carbonaro, Big Apple console.
Yeah.
Well,
We
fly us
might have
out and
crossed,
put
to
us
tell you
up.
the truth, we might have crossed paths at conventions because we were doing Mike Carbonaro shows all the time. back then.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He got us there in 05, and then he sat me down and said, at Wilson there, we even got Plymel there. And I was selling Dana Crumb's original collection, including her and Roberts, one of their Zap 1 Plymel. So I had Plymel sign it, sign a certificate. I already had Don Donahue do it. Ended up selling it at the show. Mike said, I want to be in the underground business. I want to be in business with you. So I started booking underground guests and then started helping him run the show, first with PR and then as general manager and then as co-promoter. So I'd always make sure we get underground people there. So I've done tons of panels. I've done lots of panels as a guest over the years. So that's why I can talk continuously at this point.
Ask about
Binky Brown, yes, and the whole autobiographical subgenre. One thing underground did best first was autobiographical comics. In the case of Binky Brown by Justin Green, which, multiple printings and then was collected a couple times. Last Gasp, I think, did one, and then Fanatic Graphics did one. I'm running in here to see if I can find you a copy. I've got my wall books here.
You're fine.
Probably dig out a Loughran. So basically, Justin Green was in the wave of guys from the Midwest. In fact, he still lives in Columbus, not far from me, with his wife, artist Carol Tyler. So I believe he started in Bijou or around that time in some of the tabloids. And then he did an autobiographical book with Binky Brown character as a substitute. Yeah, here's the first printing. And thing is, he's like half Jewish and half Catholic, and this is all basically growing up with Catholic guilt and masturbating and all kinds of crazy stuff. So really, and there's others we can talk about, and more modern ones that are famous that have become stage plays. Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, and things like that people in the mainstream have heard of. But yeah, okay. So this is basically a first printing, which you can tell by. I'm not going to open this.
No,
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to trust myself. After perfect. But anyway, so basically, it was groundbreaking. Still one of the best single comic issues out there. And so Crumb's done autobiographical individual stories, but they're all inspired. Basically, all inspire each other. Wilson inspired Crumb to be more sexual, overtly, gratuitously sexual, and Justin Green inspired people to do more autobiographical type stuff, which helped. And Raw was, Mouse, which sprung out of underground comics. Art Spiegelman, another early guy, started at SUNY New York in the late 60s and was doing stuff with Bijou and in comics in the since the early 70s. And his Mouse, which, won the Pulitzer Prize for literature, multiple printings, been kept in print, that started being serialized in Raw, which was another experimental crossover with the art world. Yeah. And so basically Mouse is the story, MAUS, of his family surviving the Holocaust, but he made it funny animal, which I love stuff. I love funny animal stuff. Give me my barks, this daily bread, my daily barks. And so that was, no doubt inspired to a certain extent by Binky Brown and being able to do autobiographical in an adult way.
Sure.
That can branch stuff out. And, comics as metaphor in, just like science fiction or fantasy, when done right, can reflect on the current events, but also inner and outer space, people's consciousness, their self-actualization, and, however they can best do that in the world, they're living in or surrounded by. Here's a cover. I can't show you
don't show it if you can't show it. Don't show it if you can't show it.
The giant penis that invaded New York. And speaking of lawsuits, the most famous one, and again, you can read about this in Pirates and the Mouse.
Yeah.
And I've got some uncut cover sheets I'm selling to Dan O'Neill. But basically, all right, so the story, and again, you can read about this on the CB.
I'm blowing you up again, Dan. Hang on just a second. Show those covers off again. Because we run, I put an Air Pirates 1.
I saw that.
So, yeah.
So that's a whole long story. And Pirates and the Mouse by Bob Levin.
Yeah.
It's out of print, but it's available. Fanagraphics. It's out there. tells the story more depth. But basically, again, from the Bay Area, Dan O'Neill was a wunderkind getting published as a cartoonist in newspapers. So yeah, so and O'Neill grew up loving Barks and Pogo and all that, Walt Kelly, and he started doing newspaper comics with political bent, since he was a teenager. Eventually got in the San Francisco Chronicle, and yeah, I could talk for 12 hours today about Dan O'Neill, who I've known since I was 16 and not even scratched the surface. But basically, he sought out to poke the eye of the bear, which was Disney, for social and political reasons. He wanted to free the mouse, but it's a commercial thing. So basically, and he even sent copies of these just to make sure they saw it. So,
brother.
Or had someone who worked at Disney lay a copy.
So he was really poking that wasp nest.
I was gonna say that was a hardcore poke right there.
Yeah, but basically it started when he was, with his political strips in Vietnam. I've known Vietnam veterans who've carried Odd Bakken's Name of O'Neill's strip from the Chronicle and syndicated in their pocket, next to their fiance's photo. Very influential. And he would make fun of Mickey Mouse, or he'd want to be sued. So he'd put Disney characters for a while in the strip. By 1970, he was always getting canceled. And then readers would force the Chronicle to bring him back, or other papers. So basically, whole long story. And he had his old famous Air Pirate studio with Bobby London and Ted Richards. As the core, Gary Hallgren. Anyway, read up on it online, or go to my price guide partner, Comix Joint, COMIXJOINT.com. Mark Fox, who does the price guide with me, does all the design work, brilliant. Underground retailer of renown and knowledgeable in his own right. He's got a great website, the #1 underground info website. We're still finishing it off. But that, you can click through and it'll tell you little stories about the books, show you the different printings, things like that. So basically, everyone sitting on these books had to pull them, just like earlier they had to pull Zap 4. That's why you can still find, one day in 2007, a former head shop collection, I ended up grading and pricing 37 Air Pirates 1s and 40 Air Pirates 2s in one sitting, basically. And yeah, they're sought after, and the prices have been pretty stable. They're out there. Obviously, you couldn't reprint it, but basically, so read up on it. So basically, and that was a copyright case that directly impacted underground comics, and law students still read about it.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between using some, and then Kieran Dwyer, whom I published Lowest Comic Denominator for several issues. He was a DC and Marvel artist. At the time, he was John Byrne's stepson, which coincidentally, but he didn't really have anything to do with Kieran getting into comics, and he had done Lowest Comic Denominator, as a mini comic. And then when I was at the SPX in Bethesda in '99, Neil Gaiman was there, Mark Hempel. They had just done Cherry Deluxe #1 with me. That's how we pissed off all the feminists. We made them buy, had to get all Neil Gaiman, so you have to buy a Cherry story. And Neil had owed me a story for years, and when we started publishing, I hit him up. So I'd met him on his first tour in San Francisco in '89, drove him around to the airport over multiple bridges because that was after the earthquake. But he had promised a few years later to do a Cherry story for us, and then we hit him up and we self-published it. So I was there pimping that. I was pimping my UG 3K anthology. And I'd only seen Kieran around, in Artist Alley at local shows in the Bay Area. And then we kind of hooked up there. Frank Cho won his first award there, the Ignatz, pretty cool time. So,
yeah.
So let's do it as an offset comic. And so, we started talking about it. And then we were working on it. I published in '99 in UG 3K. I don't know, 18 is my first anthology, new and old guys. Crumb didn't like Kieran's work either. It's generational. Spain and Wilson didn't like the Boondocks either. But basically, so I've got some in here. I've got Sheldon. I've got an unpublished Von Bodie story. Gilbert Hernandez. I love the Hernandez boys. But basically, so offset, square bound, bookstore distribution, and he was doing stickers and T-shirts. Consumer horror instead of the Starbucks siren.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
Yeah.
Walked up to our table at WonderCon. Hey, we work for Starbucks. Whatever. This is funny. And then Starbucks sued him.
Yeah.
And read up on that on the cbldf.org. They have to clean up their house apparently, but the website's got good information, as good as anyone. But in all my books, we have articles about it. Kieran's done stuff in Too Much Coffee Man talking about it. So I didn't publish those minis. So when our number one, I did a reprint of Zero. In Zero, he did an offset Zero floppy himself that had it on the cover. I did the second printing of it later with Kieran. We basically co-published. He got a lot of it. I mean, even before that, people were into it. All the mainstream guys loved it because it was a modern version of the Underground.
Yeah.
But basically, read up on what happened. Basically, it's we did 4 issues, 1, 2, and 3, and then the second printing is Zero. I'll dig up a cover later, but so he was sued. So yeah, I've got the trifecta. O'Neill was on the cover of my first guide. I had 2 covers, because I had worked. Because I was doing Cherry, I started doing all the porn trade shows like AVN and the East Coast Video Show, not just Comic Cons.
Sure. Yeah.
Comic artists to the porn shows and porn people at the comic shows, and I did very successful porn star bio comic with Felicia. Adult Star Stories. Still in print, still selling it, but basically people saw I was doing Cherry and Crumb and other stuff, and my friends at Carnal Comics had already been doing a very popular True Stories of the Adult Film Stars floppies that came out in an occasional trade, and they were kind of getting out of that. And so I kind of stepped in that area. So I'd be, shipping cases of Cherries to chains of, adult stores in like Florida or whatever. So basically, of course, but first cover, I have to have a porn star on it just to piss everyone off. So Terry Weigel, as a third guy in my 30s, hadn't been, married guy at the time, hadn't been following porn too closely. So when the younger women like Felicia and Mari Vox, I became friends with Kiki Dare, I hadn't really been keeping up with it directly. So nice to meet you. That's cool that you do. And then we're in Felicia's suite, at the Venetian, getting ready for the AVN Awards, the adult film, the whole red carpet thing, Oscars of porn. So we're just hanging out in her room. I've got pictures up on my Hippie Comics page on Facebook, and in walks Terry Weigel, who had been a Playboy Playmate, Penthouse Pet, got into porn stars, did bit parts in movies, Predator 2, was on it, Married with Children. So that's when my jaw dropped, and she's basically my age, but we were old enough to be old school at that time, but she was still active and whatever. So we became friends to go, hey, maybe we'll do a comic, but can you be on my cover? So basically we did a photo shoot with her late husband, Merle. I lost my Freak Brothers baseball cap that Fred and Kathy Taub gave me in her driveway leaving. But basically went down to LA, got her on a bear, leopard skin rug.
Yeah. And
she actually had Snatch 1, 2, and 3 covering her private parts. We had to Photoshop it in on top of it. So when this premiered at the FX show in Orlando, Florida, several days before it hit the comic stores, I had a case sent to me there at the fairgrounds. I had Terry Weigel there, and I had S. Clay Wilson there.
Oh,
Spain wouldn't set foot in Florida again, but so it was good.
Well, yeah, that's a lot of people. I don't.
Yeah, he never told me what the story was, but I travel around with these guys and do shows, obviously like New York and Detroit, where I met Randy 18 years ago, 19 years ago.
Yeah,
and Randy helped plug me in this area, the near, whatever you want to call it, the Near Eastern. It's not Midwest, it's Near East. You know, Fogels come from after the old country. They come from Detroit. So it was always great in Motor City. Mike Goldman hooked me up, treat us real nice. And conventions, like they started treating their artist guests like they started treating their actor guests, you know, their other celebrity guests with the green rooms and the private this and that.
Those were the days.
Back in the day, back when you could do that. That was, you know, as cons expanded and you had more old and new actors and not just genre, but things tied in, you know, for a golden period of time there before it got too big in San Diego. With parties, you know, the parties where you'd meet everyone pretty much ended, you know, by the late 90s in San Diego and elsewhere. And then other than a few regional cool shows like Motor City or FX in Orlando that were run by comic book dealers, guys who love comics but knew how to do a professional, so they kind of blurred. But then when Hollywood and the big companies, and then you'd have Network and People Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, then you'd stop seeing the celebrities. Then you wouldn't have the Babylon 5 actors smoking hash with you in your suite anymore because they'd be off doing the photo ops with the step and repeats. But yeah, stories have to change the names. I'm not going to go into it.
Yeah.
Who snorted a whole letter in cocaine, who peed in the ice machine in the Hotel San Diego, at 4 a.m, that kind of thing, But yeah, we used to have a lot of fun.
All those nefarious tales that turned into legends.
Yep. All right, we're good. What do we got?
Dan, let me put you. Let's
time.
go to the chat a little bit. Oh yeah, we got a ton of time, so it's all good. Where to start? Sorry, everybody in the chat. We've really kind of been ignoring you. Pops is in the house. Wants everybody to hit that like button. Hit that like button, folks. Hit that like button. Nefarious, this booka were my intro to. His booka were my intro to underground comics. For all intents and purposes, you could say this dude popped my cherry.
Right on.
Pop says, "Lol, I think he popped a lot of comic cherries." There you go.
Well, all props to creator Larry Wells, who was slightly, who was basically the rock and roll and the underground generation were mainly born between 40 and say 51, 52. And Larry was born in 56, and he was part of the print mint from early on with their anthology Yellow Dog. He'd actually drawn, and he'd done a lot of great underground comics in the 70s, and then he actually drew #1 in Archie parody style. And for some reason, it sat around for 5 years. The last cast published it and became an immediate sensation. Multiple printings, this or that. But yeah, all props to Larry. All I did was help get him a little wider, and then put my money where my mouth was later on. But, yeah,
I would think that Cherry kind of like taps into the same vein as the Tijuana Bible. It's like, even though he wasn't like specifically talking about specific characters, the fact that he'd had that Don DeCarlo style, and
yes,
it's like it's kind of like the same thing.
I was tight with Dan DeCarlo before he passed. After he was fired by
Archie.
I hosted him and his family, including Josie, his late wife, at San Diego, and did some limited edition signed prints that did really well through Diamond and Bud Plant. And he was a real trooper. But yeah, his was the definitive Archie style that he had begun honing before he started working for Archie, doing, magazines for Martin Goodman and, illustrations, humorous, Playboy type cartoons. But yeah, so to parody it, just like O'Neill was parodying, but 2 on the dot, Mickey Mouse, that said it was indistinguishable, it could fool people. Cherry was a little different. Now we were never sued. Larry was never sued. No one was ever sued, not by Kellogg's, not by anyone. Basically, after the first couple of issues, as things got multiple printings, Ron Turner and Larry decided, well, let's just change it to straight up Cherry. Doesn't need the Pop-Tart on the cover.
Oh, so you didn't. I mean, because I know that a cease and desist is different than a lawsuit.
There was never. No one
never. You never got that. Okay.
Nothing until years later when we were self-publishing in tail end of when we were with Kitchen Sink. after Kitchen had done the first reprints with Pop-Tart on the cover, for a short period of time, some dude named Howard Levine maybe hooked up with Larry and Sharon Wells, his wife and partner, as a manager, promoter, and he took out a full-page ad in Variety saying Cherry Pop-Tart, which he shouldn't have done. And that's when Kellogg said, hey. But Dennis Kitchen had to bear the brunt of it.
Oh, okay.
So he had printings he had to black out. It really, Dennis took a financial hit from that. But that was all Howard, and that wasn't until 14, 15 years and hundreds of thousands in print before that actually happened.
Wow. But
in the 80s, it was just more, easier to trademark, cleaner. Let's not worry. Let's not worry about it.
Okay.
And Archie, what can you do? You can't copyright an art style.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Archie in 53, out of the Tijuana Bibles, even before that. Now, when we had our infamous Cherry Pop, the year when we did the Cherry lookalike contests, we did a notorious one in WonderCon, which, anyway, long story. That was broken up.
You're good. Keep going.
Yeah. And then we did a big one in the basement of a Hotel San Diego. And I can tell you that we had the Cherry, we had the Archie executives, in the audience there in the basement. We started with a slideshow by Von Bodie's, late Von Bodie's son, Mark, great artist in his own right. And he had brought back Von's slideshow Bodie cartoon concert. I had helped Mark do that in his backyard, because I was a theater guy. Mark had done some sets and posters for me, and we had been friends since, high school, basically, because he was a Bay Area guy. We didn't go to the same high school, but we went to the same conventions, and he lived a few blocks away from me in Berkeley. So I helped him get that going. So we had that, and then, old stuff from Cavalier magazine, old Bodie strips, Cheech, and he would act them out and stuff. And then, we had, and then basically I think the Archie guys walked out during that before we got to the, the half naked women and the skits and the music and the fun. We had a great, all three of our judges are dead now, but they were awesome. We had Rich Buckler, the mainstream artist.
Oh, yeah.
And he's the late lieutenant, who was the first retailer to do his own certificate of authenticity special printing of a mainstream book, whom I had argued about whether Underground's continued after the 70s or not. Happy argument. It wasn't really an argument. It was discussion. And Kate Worley, who did Omaha.
Oh, yeah,
with her husband, Reed. And so it's like, that was the great thing about all of us being at Kitchen Sink and then Tundra. We had the three girls. We had Cherry, we had Melody, Jacques Boivin, Tales of a Strip, and we had Omaha, and we all hung out together and partied and networked, and and sales were awesome, back then, comparatively.
Well, especially compared to now. Yeah.
And then like American Splendor, you talked about Harvey Picar.
Sure.
And they did a staged reading of a script of the play version of American Splendor years before the movie.
Okay.
And it was Dan Castellaneta, Homer Simpson's voice, who would play the Harvey Picar character. But that was something Tundra had sponsored. Tundra sponsored the best parties, the most iconic parties, the biggest parties.
Well, that's also why they kind of went broke too, I guess.
Yeah. Not to be a dick about it. That's why I said that Kevin Eastman, Tundra made money with my two books.
Right.
I can tell you he didn't lose them. I used to remind him about that till I got kind of dickish, but no. Kevin's great. We go way back, and God bless him. Everything.
We love.
Again, self-publishing parody beginnings that got into something, grew into something else, like Cerebus was, so that was a real success story. One real success story, prior, biggest one prior to Bone. Bone was the biggest one prior to, Walking Dead.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Create around. So yeah.
Comics with Pops Van Zandt says, Dan, what kind of barriers, ceilings are there for underground comics today? Is it harder, or do you just say F it and go for it?
It's harder in some ways and easier than others.
Yeah.
It's harder in that you can't sell many thousands of copies through the head shops or comic stores anymore, per se. But you got the World Wide Web and you got digital and you got more people talking about it worldwide and people learning about it every day. So yeah, it's and yeah, with print on demand, what we used to call print on demand, the quality now is as good as offset or almost nearly indistinguishable.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically print, if you can print enough to make money, however you break up the nut, whether you do it all yourself or you have an inker or a letterer or whatever, you know, if you want to make actual money, you have to print enough in advance so that the per unit cost is such that you will make money above. Basically, if you can make money at 40% of cover, that's how you go into it. So if you can still, but now you can get $500 and do a nice small print run of a quality trade paperback. And with digital and YouTube and, you know, social media, you can get the word out to like-minded people in a way you couldn't before outside of the traditional commercial bookstore market, comic book stores included. But in terms of being able to be expressive and say what you want to say, it's still the best way to do it. As long as you own your IP, your intellectual property, and you can control how it's printed and what page you want an ad on, or whether it's going to be in color or there's going to be a fold out. But yeah, it's blurred enough that indie alternative, you know, if you want to call yourself underground, great. If you want it to be in the traditional style of the hippie stuff, the anti-war, the themes, pro-drug, you know, you can go for it and get a wider audience easier. But the per unit sales, and there are ways you do a trade. If you're doing, you know, I did Digipod, love it. You know, I still do offset with Marquee, which used to be Quebecor, you know, which another self-publishing buddy, Mark Weekly, turned me on to. They used to print a lot of comics back in the day. Mm-hmm. You know, so you got to, if you figure out I need to sell this many books to A, break even, and B, make a profit, knowing that the maximum will be at distribution numbers, say 40% of cover. Retailers, you traditionally sell 50% of cover, 40, you know, 50 to 40, you know, 50 to 60% of cover, 40 to 50 off traditionally is the bookstore, comic book individual store model. If they order a minimum 3 to 5 or whatever, you got to crunch your numbers. You can really screw yourself over discounts if you don't pay attention. Yeah. So if you can make money on X amount of copies, if you keep your per unit cost down, then go get a little trade, and trades can be as small as 48 pages. Square bindings can be as small as 48 pages. You know, then, but so really for the same amount of money, not accounting for inflation, from what you could have had to have spent printing in 1968 dollars or $72, it's the same, and you can get real high quality. And then there's a world where doing print on demand, you can make money as long as you keep your numbers down. But the number you want to hit when you publish, either yourself or someone else, if you can't make money at selling at $4 of a $10 book, then don't do it per se, unless you're doing it for other reasons. If you want to just break even, that's cool. I do some projects to break even. I've probably 4 dozen books, including multiple reprints of Cherry. And, you know, I've sold out of everything except for about a dozen titles that I printed enough that had higher, you know, royalties or, you know, sushi and cocaine expenses at a porn convention wrapped into the budget. You know, you do what you got to do, but if you keep your overhead to a certain number, then economically you should be okay if people respond to your stuff and you can sell it, getting it out there. You can sell yourself. So it's easier with all the social media and the networks to get it out there and find like-minded people and people who are doing, you know, coming out of, you know, fanfic in some way or another. It's like some of the early underground guys started doing fanzines, you know, in the late 50s, early 60s. You know, Grass Green was one of them who was well known in the fanzine market before he started doing undergrounds. So it's easier to be known and seen, but if people don't respond to your stuff, there's nothing you can do about it, no matter how good a marketer you are. That's just the marketplace will tell you. But you can live off a small niche with a small print run
Yeah.
if you're economically smart enough about it, you know, if you don't want to lose money, you know. But yeah,
Right.
for $500 you can get 125 square bound, you know, nice looking comics out there.
Yeah. Yep.
Nefarious
has a question for you, Dan. Is there an Asian market for comics the way that there is an American audience for hentai?
There is, but not officially. We always, even with Cherry back in the day, whether it's Crumb or Wilson or Cherry, you know, you can't sell to certain countries. You know,
right.
Japan has, Japan, China, Taiwan, whatever. They have, most of those countries have repressive, censorship laws. But the same thing is Canada. Same thing with Canada. Same thing with England, right? Cherry, we could not sell to England, Diamond UK. We couldn't sell through Diamond UK, or we couldn't sell to any English-speaking language. So that's why I'd have UK and Australian dealers taking home briefcase of stuff they'd buy wholesale from me in San Diego. You know, the Canadian censors, the Japanese censors, this or that. Now, in terms of young people or the K-pop generation or whatever you want to call them, yeah, people will respond to the art if that's what they're looking for, if that's what fills a hole in their life. But yeah, officially, no, we could never sell. Those numbers.
That's crazy, because it's like that stuff is mild compared to the stuff that I've seen coming out of Japan.
Right. So but hentai is a response to their underground comics. That's their response to the official Japanese repression. You know, and even though with that stuff, blurring out the genital, that kind of thing. But yeah, there have been some, late 70s is when really you started seeing Japanese comics, the manga, and Japanese toys starting to hit the comics market. In the Bay Area, the chain of comics first started importing those giant, what became Shogun Warriors. What the hell is this stuff? Or this or that. And then Barefoot Gen Last Gasp was a big deal, doing manga early, reprints, socially conscious or whatever. And then again, the indie publishers are the ones who brought manga to the public, your Eclipse and mainly, and then Viz later on.
Yeah.
When the European stuff, Dennis Kitchen started Kitchen Sink, and Ripoff Press started publishing European people. And we can talk a whole 2 hours about the European market and their and their lawsuits. I was just talking to a new underground collector in the south of England. Hey, dude, earlier this morning, who hopefully got a chance to check in. So, and that's the thing. So comic stores, so the fraction of comic stores that are real stores. Okay, so we're traditionally limited. You can't ship to Canada, and you can't ship to the UK or Australia. Then your English language stuff can only go so far. We've been people do get reprinted. Cherry, Crumb, obviously, overseas.
Yeah.
So that limit, so that economic censorship limited it right then and there. So, and honestly, I think I've only shipped to Japan once and never to any other Asian country.
Wow. Okay. So that's still like, because it's funny. It was like, 'cause on another show, we were kind of having a similar conversation about shipping like adult comics overseas. And I didn't think it was like still an issue. I guess I really got to look that up.
The radar. It's not an issue. I'm not, but if it's distribution numbers.
Oh, I see. You have to be large enough to them.
Yeah. And then there's dudes who drive over to New York, or whatever border, and drive stuff over. And individual, I've never had a problem shipping individual copies of Snatch or the Price Guide to England or Canada or whatever. And there's a big indigenous Canadian underground market as well. And so basically, and there are dealers who deal in the old stuff, but I don't think I've ever had anything seized in my personal knowledge, though Cherry was seized in Australia back in the day, but no back issues I've ever sent have ever been seized. Ironically, I think the first Price Guide I sent out overseas got lost temporarily. I think he got it eventually, and the dude's name is Raphael Fogel, coincidentally, no relation. And the comics I've done is with an Uri Fink, an Israeli cartoonist, his like second ever book in English, and he's like the Archie Comics level, one of the top 3 Israeli cartoonists.
Cool.
Long story about him, but I got to publish a book with him a you go to my Facebook page, Daniel Howard Fogel, you can see Leonard Nimoy laughing at it, reading it, because we had a Star Trek parody. I love doing parody stories. A lot of my Cherry stories have been parody. Done a lot of other non-Cherry parodies over the years. It's a fun way to comment on society or media or things like that. Okay. What's next?
To kind of like go back to the, you know, like how easy or not easy it is to do these types of comics now.
Mhm.
Actually, so, you know, from the very beginning, I mean, like that cover, and, you know, like it was all about, you know, poking fun at norms, really pushing that envelope, pissing people off, deliberately going out of your way, you know, kind of like, you know, these are the original edgelords, you know.
Yes.
So with social media, with it being a lot more readily available, like in terms of, I guess for lack of a better word, like is the kind of outreach to this kind of content like pretty much still the same, or is it like worse, or is it just because it's just easier to get, you know, easier to see these things, so it's like easier to like broadcast a reaction to it?
Well, the thing about a search engine is you got to know what you're looking for, or you got to make a logical assumption. And not everyone is capable of that to a certain level where they can Google through and find what they're looking at. But if they do interact with the social world and other people, eventually with like-minded people will find each other and they'll turn each other on to what's going on. But the outreach, okay, so the traditional, you know, the mail order companies, you know, and yeah, there's basically, since Last Gasp stopped distributing other publishers, you know, pretty much, you know, Ripoff Press and Bud Plant, you know, long-term mail distributors themselves, but also with a big build-up of mail order catalog. Right. And they're out there knockabout doing the same thing in England.
Knockabout, great publication.
Yeah, but people age out and they die, but people inherit their stuff and either keep it and dig it, or they read it and sell it, or some combination of the above. So, but there's only a few thousand hardcore traditional underground collectors that I know of worldwide, based on, you know, sales figures and this or that. So you get some older dude who dies. Luckily, there's some hip kayfabe type guy who comes up in his 20s or 30s, whether he's a dealer or, you know, just comes into it through, you know, skateboarding or punk, you know, whatever the crossover thing. But yeah, the traditional outreach, the traditional hippie buyers will know the catalogs and be, but if it's a price point they can make money at. Everyone, you know, distributor only makes 10 to 20% of cover price per book, which is why you got to be able to make 40% of at a minimum. And then you're selling at 50%, or the cover price stuff. That's the gravy. Still selling books at cover price years later. That's the gravy, you know, economically for you. But yeah, conventions, that's a whole art, you know, that's a whole conversation. But yeah, that was a traditional thing. Store signings. So a lot of that's still the same. Where the hip media coalesces in certain metropoli, there is crossover with the art galleries of New York and Southern California, San Francisco. In 2009, I curated the largest underground comics art exhibition ever, at least in, you know, that we know of in terms of pure numbers. But those are still in, you know, City Lights Books is still going, again, saved by crowdfunding or social media. So that's still the hip beatnik hippie nexus. And LA's the cool with the crossover Hollywood thing, where you have Leonardo DiCaprio's father, George, was an underground writer and publisher. He co-published Cherry, the first few issues with.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and we see Yenser and Gonif on the early, on some of the Last Gasp titles. That's the ones that were co-published by George.
That's funny.
That's sweet.
And he's still
small world.
And Leonardo behind the scenes have been good with some of the aging artists over the years and those in need. So
now I know you've got a big, extensive collection. Is there a holy grail for you? Something that you've always looked for you can't find?
Well, my collection, which I've rebuilt, my original collection I sold to pay like property taxes in the 70s. After my first price guide, after my first price guide came out, I sold my undergrounds to Mike Carbonaro,
Okay.
At least you had a regular
There you go.
buyer.
Yeah.
Yeah, whole long story there. I mean, I've been rebuilding it now for undergrounds. I collect. Dirty secret: I collect mainstream more than I collect undergrounds.
Okay.
But as I'm always trading with other dealers or whatever, someone pops up with something, I'll maybe trade a bunch of Spider-Man for a cool printing. For undergrounds, I could buy a Plymel anytime. I've just never pulled the trigger. So I should get off my ass and buy a first printing. It's not like I couldn't find an inexpensive one, relatively speaking. That's a book that I should own.
Of what now?
Was Snatch One first printing.
Yeah.
But I will show you my actual one of my few Grail items two of my 3 Grail items I will show you right now.
Okay.
That I will die with, hopefully.
We're intentionally not going to tell anybody where you live.
Well, yeah, just don't go to
HitComics.com. Don't
go to
HitComics.com. Put books on top of him.
All right,
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
Yeah.
There you
sold
are.
my first copy when I sold, my mainstream collection, the stuff through cover 8, December 1980. This is First Legion Adventure 247. I sold all that stuff to an Australian dealer. And then my 1981 to present day, 07 at the time. And I had been buying weekly stuff and had a diamond account through 05. That sold to Carbonaro, but he immediately flipped it to good old George from Canada. So
yeah,
he actually, he rented a truck, and a buddy and I drove it down to Wizard World LA, where I threw out my back moving those dozens of boxes.
Hail the Legion. Yes, sir.
But I haven't been back to an LA show in years, so it helped me plug in.
Yeah, when I first started working in a comic shop, in a retail shop, that book was sitting on the shelf right at eye level to me. So I had a long time to stare at it and study that fantastic cover.
Well, my original copy, and I had a complete Legion up to at that point, and then I'm recreating, and at this point I'm loosely recreating post-crisis, but mainly the earlier stuff. I'm just loosely, as I trade, I'm not going out and buying stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, first one I bought, Adventure 247, it was 36. It was like 78, 79. It was a San Francisco show.
Randy is old.
Anyway. We all are.
I bought it 90. It was like maybe a 3.5 or a 3.0, but I paid 90 for it when it was only 36. Top book and guide, Overstreet. But then it shot up right after that, so they stopped laughing at me. But yeah, Silver Age, Earth One, that's my entertainment jam. I've never wanted to do mainstream seriously. I was doing theater when Larry hijacked me from writing and directing. I had a theater degree, was working professionally before I got my diploma. Which is another crazy thing, like underground comics with small audiences, relatively speaking. And just like kind of digital is cool, but it's never, a videotape or a filming of any kind of a stage play is never the same as being at the play. Just like print will never be replaced by digital unless it was originally done in digital to take advantage of this or that. That's
and Nefarious had a great question up farther up on the chat. He says, have comics pushed into digital at all?
Fantagraphics has done some, but not with the Crumb stuff. Dana Crumb's first wife, I was real tight with her. We got close. She passed away a few years ago, but she owned the rights through divorce to Crumb's first graphic novel, Yum Yum book, and then the Eat It cookbook, which I'm going to get those back in print. I did the Eat It as marijuana cards. But Fantagraphics hasn't done anything digital with Crumb yet, so I might do the first digital Crumb stuff unless they beat me to it. But yeah, whatever creator who's been out there, who's been wanting to do digital, even on their own to self-publish in digital, has done it. You want to talk about these old guys, Fantagraphics has done some stuff. The second generation of underground guy, I call myself Silver Age. All right. Golden Age underground guys are the ones primarily born in the late 30s through the early 50s. Those of us born in the late 50s, through the mid-late 60s, I call the Silver Age guys. Gary Groth, the Hernandez brothers, Close, Bag, Mark Bodie, all us guys who are in mid-50s, early 60s now. So I call that the Silver Age. And I stopped calling it, I haven't worried about bronze or whatever, because, the digital age, this or that. But obviously there's bootleg pirated stuff out there, whatever, that's always there. New comics of any kind, as soon as they're out there, are pirated immediately. But there'll always be people, there always have to be at least a few hundred to a couple thousand people who want to buy the hard copy or read it that way or experience it that way or be a collector that way.
Yeah.
But so no one's really done major digital inroads that I know of. Though I know Fantagraphics has been doing it a while, as far as, and Fantagraphics is really the only major publisher. Well, yeah, they're the only one standing of at least of the second wave of people who are really doing it. Drawn and Quarterly out Canada, they're still doing stuff, obviously. But
we have a
Last Gaff still publishes one new traditional underground every year, a bunch of other stuff. Yeah. They've got the new Slow Death coming out, number 12, I think, any minute now, if not already. Cool.
And when it comes to digital, we have a great quote that we run of Stan Lee's every once in a while, where they ask him about digital comics. He says, "I can see boobs online all I want, but it doesn't replace holding one in your hand." So I'd much rather hold one in my hand.
Yeah, and being old enough to have met Stan over the years and the Kirbys over the years, and a lot of these old school people, starting with people who are doing, comics in the 30s, that's been a blessing of having lived to middle age and having done conventions, And again, with a lot of the crossover stuff, like I said, we were the dirty little pornos until the business grew up around the turn of the century.
Sure.
Which all of a sudden, the same people would be at the same smaller parties, or I'd have mainstream people doing cherries, like Neil Gaiman or Marv Wolfman. Marv Wolfman, the great DC Comics writer, Marvel Comics writer, editor, creator of the new Teen Titans. He was actually writing Mickey Mouse comics when Disney was self-publishing. Yeah, Disney self-published after Dell, after Gladstone, but before Gemstone. So when Disney was actually publishing in-house, that was technically self-publishing, I guess.
Yeah.
But not creator-owned. Well, except Disney. But however we're going to do it. But again, overseas.
We're gonna have to have you back on just to talk about your mainstream experiences.
Oh yeah. Back when you could smoke a cigar at a convention, and back when I could buy and sell Marvels and Supermans and Kirby covers without big zeros of the 90s coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I could talk a whole 2 hours about mainstream. I could talk a whole 2 hours or more about just about any aspect of comics. Can't draw for crap. I got a little training, just enough to know I can't draw for crap, but that maybe be a better editor. John J. Wozniak did a great underground called, more of a ground level, called Ariba Koala out of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. He was my first, art teacher, and my dad would pay him with joints. And I met him through through conventions. And then I took a master class with Bert Hogarth, Gil Kane, and Harvey Kurtzman.
Mm-hmm.
And that was at an LA creation in like 81. First out of town show I had ever done. I was still in high school. So I got basics enough to know, wow, I don't have the connect between my head, but theater and writing is connected through my head. So yeah, I can direct the F out of anything. And that's the flow and the storytelling and playing to the audience through the medium, just like kind of comics. I mean, it's easy for me to sit down and write something at this point, as long as it's not your financial aid or anything like that, where you actually got to pay attention. And, not that I need financial aid recently, but I'm just saying that's the kind of writing you do have to pay attention to. But writing does come easy to me. Been retired from theater for almost as long as I've been a comics pro. But yeah, if I ever play the lottery and win the lottery, then yeah, I'll get back to live theater, whether or not I adapt undergrounds or not.
Nefarious says, ouch, didn't realize you split the porn in the divorce too.
Oh, wow. No, I didn't actually. Not at all. Although, to be honest, I still have the DVDs that were signed to both my ex and myself in my DVD collection. Physical media, I'm moving away from that, except for books. In terms of personal consumption, I'll still collect stuff because I love collecting discrete collectibles. A Star Trek VHS is cassette tape is a discrete Star Trek collectible in its own right.
Sure.
Whether or not it came with the trading card. Same thing with, LPs. So, but if I need current media, I do prefer hard copy media. But if I can't wait to get to a store or don't want Twitter to spoil it, I will buy something digital, and I will still buy. Or with DC screwing up the distribution last year, a lot of the DC non-diamond stuff is rare and collectible and shooting through the roof. So that stuff's going to be harder to find.
Already.
Oh yeah, instantaneous. Wow. Yeah,
right. But
especially with the variant cover mess that they always do. Yeah,
but maybe if I don't get a chance to go to a store for a month or whatever, and then they'll sell out of something, then at least if I really are anal enough to need to read it right away, I can spend the extra few bucks on digital. But then I will buy the book later as next convention I get to. Couldn't tell you when.
Yeah.
Or
spin the wheel.
Or next time I travel and go to a store outside of the area.
Now we're winding up this episode of Sunday Funnies. Dan, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
I have one more question for you, for everyone out there who wants to read some awesome underground stuff, whether they order it, whether they hunt it down at a convention. What's the primer? What do you think folks should look for to really get that underground taste? That have never experienced an underground before.
All right. Basically,
and feel free to push your own stuff.
Yeah, besides hippiecomics.com, where I've got the price guide. First of all, I'll spread the joy, but basically my price guide, it's not just about what things are worth. In the original guide,
there's some awesome articles in there.
It's the article, it's why things are cool, what put it into context. So it's not just the prices. It's got everything else. It's a primer. This is a primer. My earlier stuff's a primer, the UGG 3K. But if you really, if you want to pay the guys who pay the guys, buying stuff from me, my Crumb reprints, all the, Wilson, all that stuff, the royalties are paid through. So, Hippie Comics, HIPPYCOMIX.com, or hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or Tumblr through Hippie Comics or Instagram. But if you want to buy stuff that's still in print from the publisher who paid Crumb or Gilbert Shelton, then, you're in Europe, go to knockaboutcomics.com. I think that's the URL, but Knockabout's the #1 UK publisher, seller, packager.
And that is an awesome set of publications too.
Yeah, Last Gasp. I think it's lastgasp.com. They still have the stuff they published.
Yeah.
They don't wholesale anymore, but they have plenty of retail. So get the trade paperbacks that have been published in the last 20 years. My Snatch collection, the stuff Fantagraphics has done, the biographies. So fantagraphicsbooks.com, I think. And again, they have a few things digital, maybe some of their histories, but they have biographies as well as reprint collections. Ripoffpress.com. Again,
what's the best way to get a hold of that?
Go to hippiecomics.com, but really the best way is to message me on Twitter or Facebook, or go to the website, and you can either order through or just call me and use your credit card or debit card.
Fogel's Underground Price Guide. And you're getting ready to kick out another version of that, right?
Yeah, this is volume 2. It's not a whole new guide.
Okay.
Undergrounds move at a slower pace than mainstream books, so we don't need a yearly guide. Plus, the numbers aren't there to justify it.
Sure.
To be honest with you. Yeah, we can't sell the numbers that Overstreet can. And thank God Bob Overstreet never did the Undergrounds. We were trying to get him to do Underground around the turn of the century, but then, and he originally didn't want to do it because he didn't want to be the arbiter of what was this or that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But then the whole slabbing phenomenon got all the attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we stopped trying to push it on him, and I started doing my own guide in the Overstreet style. We still use Overstreet's grading standards, and when I grade and price the tens of thousands of books I buy every year, underground or mainstream, I'm always researching, and as I grade and price, I either have to find the price, determine the price of something that that's going to be in my guide so I can sell it, or help Overstreet refine it. So volume 1 had almost 10,000 individual books and prices.
Yeah.
Volume 2, like my supplement, I'm only going to update about 500 prices and add another 500 from the stuff that was in the 10,000 that was there. I'm going to update the mini comics. I'm going to up the small press mini comics. I'm going to update the British and expand to Euro. I'm going to add the Tijuana Bibles. I'm going to add fanzines, not all fanzines. My buddy Robin Dale does a great Dale's fanzine price guide, and he's going to come up with me and help me do the ones that are more underground oriented or crossover. Going to have the tabloid newspapers. Going to be adding those, maybe record covers. You know, the 150 or so Gilbert Hernandez, Jaime Hernandez, Robert Crumb, Rick Griffin record covers that have been out there since the 60s.
Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're officially breaking ground this month. Basically my partner Mark Fox, who runs the comicsjoint.com and has created that, which is the #1 underground reference site in the world. He's just moved west to Portland from the Memphis area. So now he's all set. You know, I'm updating my operating system and creative suite and all that, so our books are congruent. And unfortunately, it's going to take, I've got millions of clicks. Every book I do, I have to wear another brace. So when I work now, wrist brace, elbow brace. I'm ergonomic because it's going to be hundreds of thousands of clicks to finish my text in Excel, with year, title, cover price, blah, 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 all the way through to the creators. So that'll be, 8 to 10 solid months of just really focusing on that. So yeah, 2022 at the earliest. And then we will combine volume 1 and volume 2 in some giant digital print combination moving forward from that.
Cool. Before we leave,
and I've got some new Crumb reprints coming out. Oh, new old Crumb books coming out too.
Pops wants to know who your favorite Freak Brothers.
Undergrounds.
Cool.
Yeah, Tara Murphy's Seibel, who was Harvey Picar's last major collaborator here in Cleveland. So I've got a project going with her, and there are 1 or 2 other things that are going on besides the Crumb, besides the guide, just to get all the Pizimpin out.
On the way out, Pops wants to know if you have a favorite Freak Brother.
Well, I'm more like a Phineas, the crazy overthinker. I see a lot of myself in Fat Freddy's slothfulness as well.
I'm afraid I do too. But I'm not in you, but in myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, he's got the cat. Fat Freddy's got the cat, which is all
very true. Story. Yep. One more time, Dan, let everybody know how they can get a hold of you.
All right. www.hippycomix.com or through Hippie Comics, Daniel Howard Fogel on Facebook, at Hippie Comics, Twitter, at Hippie Comics, Instagram, at Hippie Comics, Tumblr. My phone number is up on all those pages and everything. So, you can text me, message me, whatever. I do this every day. I'm either researching or I'm grading and pricing, bagging and boarding. That's my life. But thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
No,
Dude, thank you so much for
really
coming on. I've been wanting to have you on for months just to shoot the shit, and talk about your experiences, because I know you know so much more about the underground era than I do. So appreciate you being on deeply.
No problem, man. I have to relearn stuff I learned 30 years ago, though. So it's an ongoing, bumps out of my head when I put a new thought in.
I hear you. Daphne, thanks for being here. Tell folks how they can get a hold of you.
Oh, you can find me at egoworks.com, egoworks.com. That's my main portfolio site. There you'll find all my links to all my social media. You'll find also my comics, Ego Raven, Heir of the First Unicorn, which you can read for free on that website. You'll also find a link to my other comic, Tall Tales, if you prefer your fantasy to be more running, jumping, skipping, climbing Mount Doom type. And you can also read that for free as well. There's a link there. And you can also find a direct link to my infamous House of Bob furry porn collection, because I have something for everybody.
Awesome. There are some furry stories from back in the day I could be telling you.
Oh, yeah. No, we could probably do an entire episode on that. Yeah.
Yes, we could. Yes, we could. Yep.
We should. It's got some good friends still.
Because there's a lot of overlap with underground and furry fandom. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And then once again, we're going to be back here next Sunday morning with another episode of the Sunday Funnies, where we're going to talk about the more lighter, whimsical side of comics, the collector's side of comics. Hopefully we'll have Dan back on again real soon.
Many times as you want. I can talk about
Don't open that door, buddy.
Open that door. Just slam it right open.
We deeply appreciate you being on. I love hearing all of those old experiences. A lot of stuff that nobody knows, few people have even seen, that needs to get out there and noted, especially when it comes to that era and that period of comics.
Helps being born in San Francisco in the mid-'60s.
I bet it
I
does.
was there.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks again for listening in the chat. Thanks again for listening on the radio. We deeply appreciate you all. We're going to see you again soon. Please feel free to send us your comments and suggestions for future broadcasts. I'm your host, Randy Zimmerman. You can get a hold of me at Facebook under Randy Zimmerman. You can find me on Twitter under Randy Zim. Great things coming, folks. So we appreciate you listening. We're going to go out the same way that we came in. And in the end, Dan, we have this all-important question that we usually ask everybody. Here's the question.
Do you draw the Flintstones naked? There's a market for that.
No, but I have friends who do, and I've got some work in my portfolio I can show you.
There we go. All right, everybody, take care. Have a great week. Stay healthy. See you soon.